Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good whatever time of day it is. Thank you for watching Conversations with Dr. Don. This show is produced and broadcast from the Portland, Oregon studio in the USA. And for your first-time viewers, Conversations with Dr. Don is an ongoing series of one-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people like most of you out there about who they are as unique, one-of-a-kind individuals and whatever it is that we're going to talk about. And I kind of smile because I've done this for 17 years and I still butcher the opening comments. My guest this evening is Paul Cienfuegos. Paul Cienfuegos, who is just so world-traveled and knows so darn much stuff. Whenever I talk to him, I think I'm going to come across totally dumb because he's done so many things in his life. I'm looking at a 2-page copy of 8-point type of a history of his bio and what he's been doing all over the world, and it's really impressive. And I already told him that we're going to need 3 hours just for the bio and not talk about the subject, which will be an engaged citizen and what a really engaged citizen is about. So as you know, the show goes in 2 major segments. The bio part about who you are, so I can ask you some personal questions so people will have an idea where you're coming from when you have opinions and views on what you'll be talking about. And so let's get right into it. We'll start with the personal questions. And I'm not going to put on my shrink hat and talk to you like a psychologist, as I am. If I were to ask your best friend, who is Paul, what would your best friend say? Paul is what?
He's a really intense, passionate guy who is driven to do social change work as his primary work in the world.
For a long time?
Really going back to high school.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, but in terms of serious social change, community organizing work, starting in my first year of college, 1976-77.
I'm going to have a hard time not asking you some probing questions as how you got to think and be that way, but we'll postpone that.
Okay.
And when and where were you born?
I was born in Santa Monica, California in 1958.
58. Why were you born?
I don't know. Why were you born?
To do what I'm doing.
Uh-huh.
To learn to be kind and caring and to be nice to people.
Uh-huh.
Simple as that. Golden rule or something. Any significant about your racial or national or cultural heritage worth repeating?
I come from a Jewish Holocaust family.
Oh.
That's relevant. So I think that has definitely had an impact.
Really?
In my commitment to social change.
Oh, yeah.
Because my immediate family was safe, but my mom was 10 when they got out of Holland. Her nuclear family left Holland about 6 months before the Nazis invaded Holland and occupied it. And her dad was a prominent, an internationally famous journalist in Holland, so he was following the situation pretty closely. So he was able to get the immediate family out way before it got really scary, but he couldn't convince any of his family or friends to leave with him. So they all died.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so I've got a lot of lost relatives. And
you've had some stories about previous generations. Oh my gosh, I can't imagine. I can't begin to imagine. A religious preference nowadays, do you have one?
I'm pagan.
Did you have one earlier on that was different than being a pagan?
Well, I was raised culturally Jewish, but not religiously Jewish.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. My friends, when I tell my friends I'm not a spiritual person, they laugh and they say, "Your work is your spirituality, Paul."
What is spirituality, Paul? What is that, spirituality?
I don't know. I feel closest to whatever a spiritual feeling might be when I'm in wilderness. I spent a lot of time in wild lands as a hiker, backpacker, kayaker.
Yeah.
That's where I'm most at peace.
Spiritual feeling. What's the difference between a spiritual feeling and ordinary feelings?
I'm not, see, this is where I would say I'm not a spiritual person. I don't know how to answer that question.
I've had this a number of times answering this for myself. It's when I have a feeling that is indescribable. For example, I can see a puppy and if things are just right and the stars are in the right stage and that puppy causes a tear to come to my eye. for a few moments before I go off using my brain to think some more. That's a spiritual feeling for me. And things like that, indescribable, but joyous and enabling and all that kind of good stuff.
Uh-huh.
I forgot, I'm supposed to be interviewing you, you're not me. And how about your formal education?
I got a Bachelor of Arts degree in what was called General Studies at the time at the Evergreen State College up in Olympia, Washington, which is a pretty amazing radical public university where you take one course per year, and it's team taught and interdisciplinary. And back then there were no grades and no tests.
Wow.
So pretty amazing for a public university.
And fully accredited and recognized?
Fully accredited. Quite famous, really, these days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about other education worth mentioning that got you to be who you are today?
Early adulthood, I bumped into the work of Joanna Macy, who's a Buddhist scholar and social change, amazing woman who's now in her 80s. And I went to the very first ever training for trainers that she led in leading workshops that were then called Despair and Empowerment in the Nuclear Age workshops, to help people come to terms with their rage and grief and despair and numbness about living in a world that's so endangered.
And at that time, you recognized that even back then?
Yeah, that was when I was 22, 23 years old. And I ended up getting involved in her social movement work and traveling to Scotland, and ended up living in Scotland for more than 2 years and bringing these workshops to Europe. I was the originator of her work in Europe. Yeah. By chance, just as a fluke. I was 23 when I went to Europe. I was there for 3 years.
And you were teaching people who were interested in learning how to be engaged?
How to survive their intense, painful feelings about the world. Back then it was fear of nuclear holocaust. The concerned scientists had the nuclear clock at 3 minutes to midnight back then, and everybody was worried that we were on the verge of a nuclear war.
Yeah.
And so everybody across the world was emotionally freaking out. It was a very scary time. And these days, it's climate is the thing that is most freaking us out. That, if you're raising kids, you're wondering whether those kids are going to have a future on this planet. So there has been, a whole series of pretty complicated things that cause, issues that cause complicated feelings in people.
Wow. Okay.
So I integrate a lot of that into my work. Joanna Macy's teachings and exercises, I've integrated into the workshops that I lead.
A typical workshop, what subject comes to mind now when I ask you about a typical workshop?
Well, for the last almost 20 years, I've been leading a full weekend workshop that I call We the People Are More Powerful Than We Dare to Believe, First Steps in Dismantling Corporate Rule. That's really what I do full time and have for many years.
You're taking on corporate rule?
That's what I do full time.
I think I asked you earlier, how many lists are you on other than Homeland Security?
I have no idea. If you figure it out, you let me know.
Yeah. Full time?
Yeah.
And this is what you've done for all these years?
For almost 20 years. This is my 20th year, leading these workshops and doing organizing, helping local communities to strip corporations of their constitutional rights and protect themselves.
Have you seen the results of your workshops?
Substantially. In fact, I think it's really the only social movement alive in the U.S. today that has win after win after win on its record. We are at the point now that we've passed the only social movement on corporate rule that has so many wins. That's what I meant. We've now helped 200 communities in 9 states to pass these extraordinary locally enforceable laws that ban all sorts of harmful corporate activities. There's no other movement that's successfully doing that. So mining, logging, GMO agriculture, water withdrawal for bottling, that sort of thing. Anything that a corporation wants to do in a community that the community doesn't want, we have this extraordinary, groundbreaking kind of lawmaking that we help communities pass.
So you empower the citizenry in a community.
That's right. Yeah, because I think at this point the political system is so corporatized at the state and the federal level, where almost everyone who's been elected in the state legislature or the federal legislature, and certainly the presidents, are there because they got more money than their opponent, and most of that money came from giant corporations. So we're in this place where you can't really, 80% of the public might want universal, Medicare for all type health system. Doesn't matter. We're not going to get it because our elected officials are so corporate bought. And so what we've decided is that the local level is the place where you start to actually build real democratic culture, because you can't really do it at this point at the state or federal level. The system's just too corporate.
What are you going to do when you stop doing what you're doing now?
Retire. I'm going to do this until I have no energy left to do this. This is my life work. I'm very excited about what I do.
Oh, yeah. And you're pretty tired now. You just got back from being out of state.
At 1 this morning, I landed at PDX from Iowa City in Iowa. And that was my second trip to Iowa this month. Yeah, which in terms of greenhouse gases is totally embarrassing that I even did it. But it's like a 35-hour train ride. It's just, I can't do it anymore at my age. I can't spend 2 nights in a train seat to cross the country. So I'm flying, but I'm leading these workshops all over the Midwest. I'm going to the Midwest, Iowa, Wisconsin, Minnesota. I've been traveling to every 2 to 3 months for 3 years now. That seems to be where the action is in terms of people wanting my work.
People want your work. How do they learn about you? And word of mouth? Or?
A lot of it's word of mouth, and increasingly I'm on national radio. There's a show called Alternative Radio that's run by David Barsamian.
Oh, yes.
And he's on a couple hundred radio stations every week.
Oh, yes.
He has played one of my original speeches once a year, every year for the last 5 years. 5 speeches.
See?
And my speeches are up there in his ratings with Winona LaDuke and Edward Said and Noam Chomsky and the others. It's kind of extraordinary. He says that, because he runs this tiny little organization that employs 2 or 3 full-time people. They do all this free stuff for the radio stations. They don't have to pay a penny. So the entire income for the show Alternative Radio is people then going out and buying the CD or the transcript or the MP3 of the speech. And so that's the way that they rate how successful it was, is how many people buy what they heard on the radio. And my numbers are way up there. So he keeps saying, okay, we want another one, and I'm thrilled. And once a year I'm reaching tens of thousands of people. I have no idea.
I'm so honored and pleased that you're here on my community access.
It's very
show,
exciting.
Man. Yes, wow. Do you have a partner, boyfriend, girlfriend, wife, husband, any of those?
I do not currently have a partner.
All right.
No. I want one.
Huh?
I want one. I've been wanting long-term relationship for a long time, but I have.
Tell the audience out there that you're looking for somebody that's gonna.
No, I'm not going to do that. But they heard it.
Okay,
Yeah.
Sure, of course. Political persuasion. I didn't ask you that question. I think it's implied whether you're on the left or the right or the center, or you're a Tea Party or what.
I'm trying to think if there's labels that I'm still comfortable using in public. My work is so transpartisan. I work with Republicans, Libertarians, Greens, Democrats, Independents, across the spectrum. The local rights-based work that I do, I work with people everywhere. So, what titles? I call myself a bioregionalist. I'm a strong feminist, and I think I'm not going to give you kind of left and right wing designations for myself.
Yeah, I asked that question because some people.
I'm a populist.
Okay, that's one we can agree on. Because they look at something, oh, that's a label. Well, it may be a label to some people, and for others, it's some way of identifying what you're about to get an idea where you're coming from when you say things. So, yeah, populist, I like that. Yeah. Progressive populist?
I used to use the word progressive, but I don't anymore to describe myself, because as I've learned the history of progressivism in the early 20th century, I've discovered that the progressives were the first major social movement in U.S. history that welcomed corporations into the body politic, and I have no interest in that. So the populists were the last great social movement in U.S. history that refused to concede that the corporation should have any involvement in the political process. So that's why I call myself a populist. Yeah,
I'm learning a bunch
I don't think
here.
progressive is a good thing anymore.
Oh man, wow,
Yeah.
that's great. Yeah.
There's a wonderful book about this if listeners want to know more. It's called The Triumph of Conservatism. A really famous historian wrote it. Now, why can't I think of his name? It'll come to me.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Do you have any memberships in political or social or civic organizations worth mentioning, or none come to mind right now?
National Association of Railroad Passengers, NARP.
Are you serious?
I'm serious.
How did you get that?
It's a membership organization. I'm a railroad passenger who is politically active as a railroad passenger.
So that's why you're flying now, because you're tired of spending so many hours on trains.
I do a lot of training within the West Coast from Portland, from the Amtrak station here, but yeah, it's just too much to go all the way to the Midwest.
So that's a significant organization, but it's
yeah, it's the only reason we still have train service in the United States, is that we have a major lobbying organization for the trains. We would have lost it. The Republicans have been trying to zero budget Amtrak every year for decades. Zero budget, wipe it off the map.
Oh, well, we're thinking about the train systems in other Western countries and compared to what's going on in this country. And that's a whole other subject. We can get into that.
Yeah. I don't think I'm a member of any other organization. Isn't that funny? That might be it.
Okay, how about persons from the past or alive today? Any names come to mind of people you look up to or admire? Any heroes?
Oh, Noam Chomsky and Howard Zinn are probably at the top of my list.
Me too.
Arundhati Roy
Yes.
is one of my heroes.
Yeah.
Um,
Did you like Gandhi?
Ani DeFranco is a hero.
Yeah.
Did I like? Of course. I'm amazed by Gandhi. What a brave man.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Martin King? Martin Luther King? Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I got lost on that one anyhow. A couple other questions before we go to the second part of the show. How do you see the mainstream media in this country today? Is it left, right, or center?
I actually think it's a diversion to think of it as left or right. I think it's corporate. That because mainstream media is entirely owned by corporations, it can't be trusted.
Is then corporations generally left or right in their orientation politically?
I think the question is a diversion. I don't think it actually. We don't have any truly left-wing mainstream media. We have corporate Democrat media like MSNBC, and we have corporate Republican media like Fox, and everything else is kind of in the middle. But if you look at what's happening to MSNBC this month, where they're kind of stripping their left-wing journalists of jobs, I don't know if you're following this, but
just a little bit.
The owners have decided that, that there's too many left-wingers doing shows on MSNBC, so they're firing a bunch of them, this month. So it's really, I think what's most relevant is who owns them, not whether they happen to have a progressive or a conservative, news analysis perspective. Is that the shows are all through a corporate lens.
What's your IQ?
I have no idea. I have no idea.
It's way the hell up there. I'm pretty smart, but I'm just smart enough to know when somebody's smarter than me, so I won't get into a fight with you.
I don't know if that's necessarily the case, Don.
You're very brilliant. You're brilliant. It's a delight for visiting with you and learning most every other answer you give me about something. It's a broader, deeper appreciation of what you're talking about.
Yeah, well, I mean, you've probably seen, in various social movement circles that, I think in the anti-corporate global trade treaty movements, you hear frequently people say it's not left versus right. What's most important is top versus bottom. I'm sure you've heard that, right? So it's like, to me, that's the politics that really matters. There's been this, divide and conquer strategy in the United States, really from the beginning after the American Revolution, where the various people who are out of power, who have no real governing authority, the 99%, let's call them, are always being placed to fight with each other. Workers versus environmentalists is a propaganda concept. It's not a real concept. It was designed by corporate leaders to make sure that working class people and environmentally concerned people see each other as enemies, right? I mean, and so there's all of these, as people of different colors came across as immigrants into the United States over the last century and a half, they were all propagandized to not trust each other. So it was always worker versus worker, right, in the Industrial Revolution. Because if they organized together, they'd be a threat against the power structure. And so this divide and conquer thing goes on, and now we have Republicans and Democrats, and they're supposed to hate each other. But the reality is, on the issue of corporate rule, which is the issue I do work on full time,
yes,
Republicans and Democrats are generally in agreement on corporate rule. Not the leaders, but the voters. So for example, 5 years ago when the Supreme Court decided on this famous Citizens United decision that everyone talks about, 75% of Republicans said they opposed, Republican voters said they opposed the Citizens United decision that gave even more funding capacity to corporations to manipulate our elections. 86% of Democrats. 75% Republicans, 86% Democrats said they were opposed to more corporate involvement in our elections. Well, why didn't the Democrats and Republican voters work together at that point against corporate rule? No, we hate each other, right? We don't trust each other. We mock each other. We make fun of each other.
Who arranges that? How did that happen? How do people get to think that way?
It's a divide and conquer strategy. It's been going on since the very, very beginning. I mean, James, I just learned recently that George Washington had something he called his divide and crumble strategy. I love that term, where they were trying to, as they were trying to turn early United States into yet another empire, because it wasn't actually supposed to be. Its origins were not supposed to be, we're going to just replicate the British Empire and make a new empire. It was actually going to be a decentralized confederation of democratic states that didn't have these goals of, conquering the world. But George Washington had other ideas, and so they turned the country into a very different kind of system than it was originally designed to be, post-revolution. And he was creating political strategy that kind of bought off what we would call the middle class today into his camp, so that the middle class would stand with, small farmers, basically farmers with a tiny little bit of land, they had some rights because they owned land, and they were bought off to stand with the ruling class against working people. That was his divide and crumble strategy. So it's been going on forever.
Will there always be that kind of a class distinction and class conflict among humankind?
As long as the 1% rules, there will be. But if we ever have truly democratic culture in the United States, it's like you and I can vote for president, but the people that get chosen for us, the winners
chosen for us.
Yeah, it's like we're going to end up with a corporate Democrat and a corporate Republican, and we're going to get to vote. Right?
Is Bernie a corporate Democrat?
No, but they're doing the Democratic establishment, Democratic Party establishment is doing everything they can to make sure he's not the candidate, right? I mean, all you have to do is look at the Democratic National Committee, DNC. Is that what it stands for? Mm-hmm. The DNC is chaired by this woman who was Hillary Clinton's campaign manager 4 years ago. And we're supposed to believe that the reason that there's so few national presidential debates this year, on the Democrat side, there's 12 or 14 on the Republican side. There's 6 on the Democrat side, and we're supposed to believe that's just some kind of fluke, right? You have Martin O'Malley and Bernie Sanders demanding more debates, but the Democratic National Committee has made them sign something that says if they agree to participate in any other televised debate, they will be banned from all further official DNC debates.
Didn't the League of Women Voters manage this?
They
this
did
whole debate
until a few decades ago, and that was seized from them by a corporate institution called the Commission on Presidential Debates. They stole it from the League of Women Voters, literally. The League wrote a letter to the Commission on Presidential Debates saying this is an outrage. They lost control of the presidential debates. And I don't know if you noticed, but it gets worse and worse every year. This year in the debates, Dems and Republicans, the people who have the highest polling numbers get to stand in the middle. That's never been the case before. Have you noticed that? Have you watched the debates?
About 10 or 15 minutes at most.
It used to be a random selection as to where they would stand on the stage. Now the people who have the highest polling numbers are front and center. I mean, it just gets more and more disgusting, every cycle. There's no democratic
Your mind is
anything
incredible.
going on.
All right, couple of points before we go to break. What's right with America? Give me 2 or 3 things that are right with America. Because I'm going to ask you about 2 or 3 things that are wrong with America. We're going to finish with that.
That one will be easy for me. What's right?
Yes.
Well, one thing that's right in America is that so many people are striving to make it a better country. There's social movements on every topic across the United States. I mean, we're the world's cop, but we're also, one of the most visionary populations in the world of people really trying to turn it around. So that's one thing.
Okay.
I need to find 2 more right now.
No, one's enough if you want to stop there.
I need to think about it. Well, another beautiful thing about the United States is our history with protecting of wildlands. I mean, there are very few countries that had enough vision in their early development to protect massive amounts of lands from being industrialized or poisoned.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's not enough, and as I've learned about how you protect wildlands so that it's ecologically functional, so that major predators, for example, can survive in it, you need much bigger chunks than what got saved, but it's still, very impressive by world standards. So there's another one.
So is there something in the American makeup, the average American's makeup, that they're more concerned with and living lovingly, considering other species, than say other cultures and other countries?
I don't think there is. That's my guess. No, other than indigenous people who have a much more sacred relationship with the living world. I think our culture is starting to be mature enough that we're starting to pay attention to Native American culture and their relationship with life and going, oh yeah, we screwed up. This makes sense. We should pay more attention to what it means to be in relationship with the world rather than seeing ourselves as over everything.
Are you a Buddhist?
No, I have a lot of respect for Buddhists.
I can tell. There's something about that prompted that question. What I'm hearing about you and your views of things that are important to human beings.
Yeah.
Yeah, some real depth there that without talking about in terms of labels, I don't want to deal with it again. So let's take a break now and come back in a few minutes and talk about what you want to talk about.
Okay.
Right, we are back, and thanks for staying tuned. And for you viewers who missed the opening of the show, you're watching Conversations with Dr. Don. It's an ongoing series of 1-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people like Paul Cienfuegos here. And we're going to talk in the second half of the show about his community activist kinds of stuff. And you had a name for it a minute ago?
Community rights movement.
Community rights movement.
Yeah.
Community rights movement. And that's more oriented in what's going on in the western U.S. and
actually more in the northeast.
Northeast. Yeah.
So far, we're slowly building it in the West Coast states.
So people have to learn what community rights are and that they can do something about it. And yeah.
Yeah. Do you want me to tell people?
Of course,
about,
please.
Yeah. The community rights movement started in 1999 in a small farming community, a conservative rural farming community in Pennsylvania, Wells Township.
That's fairly recent, huh?
1990, yeah, 15, 16 years ago, where a group of farmers were trying to figure out how to stop a giant factory farm of hogs, 15,000 head factory farm, from coming into their township and pretty much destroying their township. It's a rural farm community. And they assumed that there was somewhere in the Pennsylvania government where they could go to say to whatever agency that looked at this, made these kinds of decisions, we don't want this giant hog farm in our community. And it turned out that that's not really how government works these days, that all they could do is talk to the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture people who were pulling together a manure management plan for the hog farm applicant. And they didn't really want to talk about manure management. They wanted no hog farm in their community. So they worked with this public interest environmental law firm, and after kind of trying to stop this thing through the conventional regulatory approach, and giving up on it after a couple years, this public interest law firm wrote them a draft law, local law, called an anti-corporate farming ordinance that banned corporate hog farms in Wells Township, Pennsylvania. And what's interesting about this moment in our history is that what the law was that they passed, 5-0, their township passed, was illegal. That it's actually illegal, and most Americans don't realize this, it's illegal for a local government to pass a law that bans a harmful corporate activity. It's illegal. And it's illegal because of these structures of law that have existed in the United States for more than a century. 3 structures of law, briefly they are: corporate constitutional rights, that corporations have been winning constitutional rights since 1819. They've won half a dozen or more amendments to the Constitution they now get access to, and other constitutional rights. They have free speech, First Amendment rights, they have religious freedom rights, they have property rights, they have protections against search and seizure, they have privacy rights, they have all sorts of rights that were never intended for a business structure. They were intended for us.
How'd they get all these rights?
Through the U.S. Supreme Court over 196 years.
The Supreme Court is the most powerful of all the different branches of government.
It's much more powerful than the other, It's kind of like our king. Because if you think about it, you know, we're proud that we don't have a king, but we actually do, right? The king is, the king rules for life, can't be fired, his decisions cannot be appealed. That's our Supreme Court, right? He can overrule the other branches of government, and they do. So corporate constitutional rights, so corporate rights trump our rights. Second structure of law, something called state preemption. State preemption means that if the state regulates, i.e. allows a certain kind of corporate activity, a local government is not allowed to prohibit that activity. So if a state regulates factory farms, a county government can't prohibit factory farms, right? We have counties in the Willamette Valley that are trying to pass laws to ban GMO agriculture, and our Democrat-controlled state legislature passes a law that bans counties from prohibiting GMO agriculture, right? That's state preemption. The state says you can't. And then the third one is this really obscure structure of law that most people have never heard of, called Dillon's Rule, named after John Forrest Dillon, who was a late 1800s Iowa State Supreme Court judge. And he had this idea that the proper relationship between state government and local government was that of parent to child. That local government has no inherent authority. It just has the authority granted to it by state government. And so you put all these 3 structures of law together, and you end up with a legal system where a local government doesn't have the authority to ban a harmful corporate activity. It's illegal. So when Wells Township, Pennsylvania passed this thing that banned corporate farms, they violated state preemption, Dillon's Rule, and corporate constitutional rights. And they did so very purposefully because they got to a point where they were less worried about being sued by the corporation or the state than they were worried about losing their quality of life. And that's where the movement started. And so fast forward 15 years and we now have 200 communities in 9 states, mostly in the Northeast, but a few in Ohio, one in California. Where else are we? We had one in New Mexico, but it lost in court. And so 200 communities in 9 states that have passed these really amazing laws. Each law bans a particular kind of corporate activity that's harmful, enshrines the right of a community to govern itself, and strips that sector of corporations of all of their so-called constitutional rights, all in one local ordinance. 200 communities in 9 states have passed these. That's why I said earlier in the show, this is really the only significantly successful movement in the U.S. against corporate rule today. I mean, movements that are focusing on marches and pickets and boycotts are not, which is what most anti-corporate activism is.
So these laws are there and exist, and they're legal and they're enforceable.
They're not legal.
That's okay.
They're not legal. They violate these 3 structures of law, and they do so very purposefully because these structures of law violate our rights as citizens of the United States. That's our argument.
So you're talking to people about how to do something about that?
About how to do something about what? I'm not sure I understand.
About these laws that exist, and you say they're unfair?
I've lost your.
I lost myself too.
Okay.
Please go on.
So communities that pass these, they understand the laws are illegal, but they also understand that they're less worried about being sued than they are about what will happen to their community if the mine comes in, if the clear cut comes in, if the toxic waste incinerator comes in, if the big box store comes in, right? That it does more harm than good to their community. So, and only 5% of the 200 communities have ever been challenged in court. So really, 190 of 200 communities have done this extraordinary thing and have protected their communities from corporate harms.
So there is some hope and some success.
There is, a lot of hope in our work.
And you're teaching these people how to do this?
I am, yeah. So in October, I was in northern Wisconsin, in Ashland and Bayfield, Wisconsin, up on Lake Superior, helping a community to figure out how to stop the first ever factory farm from their county. I was there in the summer to lead an introductory workshop, and I came back in October to lead a weekend intensive workshop. And I was in Iowa City and Fairfield, Iowa in both October and last week, helping communities to try to figure out how to stop the Bakken oil pipeline from crossing Iowa from North Dakota. So yeah, my work is in increasing demand. Yeah. And
it's successful.
It's successful. That's what's so extraordinary. And the weird thing is, the way that you're supposed to if a community wants to try to stop a corporate activity, the way that they're taught that they should do it is by passing a regulation or a zoning ordinance. But the problem is, if you do what's legal, the courts overrule your decision and they throw it out. So you've got this very counterintuitive situation now in the United States where we're passing illegal laws that are mostly not being challenged. And when they try to pass legal laws, they're thrown out in court. It's an interesting moment.
How much of your teaching involves civil disobedience or non-cooperation, those kinds of things?
So we're quite involved as a movement in civil disobedience in 2 ways. First off, we call the laws that we're passing municipal acts of civil disobedience. The laws themselves are acts of civil disobedience because the laws are illegal, right? So the lawmaking is civilly disobedient. In addition, once we pass the laws, sometimes it's necessary for the residents of that town or county to commit more direct action civil disobedience if the government ignores the law that was passed that says no to that corporate activity. So for example, in down south here in Josephine County, Oregon, in a community rights ordinance that went to the ballot last year and it didn't pass. So they're going to run it again in 2 years, we're hoping, try to get it passed. There's a line in their ordinance that says, and their ordinance, by the way, was a ban on corporations and government doing aerial spraying of pesticides on farm and forest land, a ban on spraying. And there was a line in the ordinance that says that county residents in Josephine County, if it's necessary for them to do civil disobedience after the law is passed, to block the corporations from doing these harmful things, those acts of civil disobedience will be considered fully legal under county law. So that what would normally be considered an illegal act becomes a legal act under county law. So that's pretty trippy. In State College, Pennsylvania, a group of residents, after they passed a ban on any more pipelines under their town, and their mayor ignored the law that they had just passed through the ballot box and acted like it didn't exist. He said, it's illegal, it's unconstitutional, we're just going to ignore the law that the public passed in the town where he's elected. And so the townsfolk called on Occupy Wall Street and Greenpeace and asked for civil disobedience training so that they could actually blockade the building of the pipeline, since the law they passed was about to be ignored by the mayor. And as soon as they started getting trained, the mayor finally blinked and canceled the pipeline project. So there's another act of civil disobedience.
You're dangerous.
Our movement is dangerous. It is. Yeah.
What recent challenge have you had, particularly in the Portland metro area or this area of Oregon, that you were successful seeing a change?
Well, we have an active community rights group here in Portland. Our website's communityrightspdx.org. We've been meeting for more than 3 years. We're hopefully no more than a month or two from launching our own ballot initiative, Community Rights Ordinance, as a ballot initiative. But I can't tell you what it is because we're not publicly launched yet. But it's going to have to do with protecting the rights of neighborhoods. That's all I can tell you.
So the end result will be the neighborhoods will be protected from corporate domination?
From corporate activities.
Wow,
well, of course, we have to get 40,000 signatures. That's a major piece of work to get it on the ballot, and then we have to win. So, and there could be legal challenges along the way. So we've got our work cut out for us. But within a few months, communityrightspdx.org will be, people will start to know we really exist.
It's a good thing you've got these successes behind you.
Yes. Yeah, there's the only major city in the country that has passed one of these laws so far is Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, that passed a fracking ban. Yeah. So we'll be the biggest city in the country to be running a community rights campaign in the near future.
I never really thought of community rights in the way that you're talking about them. It just didn't occur to me before. Well, I'm learning some more tonight. So what else have you been involved with recently that you consider a significant success?
There are 9 counties in this state, in Oregon, that have launched community rights campaigns, ballot initiative campaigns. And I helped to start 6 of those groups, so that I'm very proud of that. Benton County attempted this last year to ban GMO agriculture, and they didn't get the votes they need, so they're going to run it again in a couple years. And Lane County is going to try to do something similar next. I think they're on the ballot for this coming spring. I think they have already collected the signatures they need. So this May there will be a right to a local food system ordinance in Lane County, which is Eugene's county, that would ban GMO agriculture entirely.
That's a big step.
Yeah, in Columbia County, which is one county from here. It's down the Columbia River, one county from here. It's interesting because we're such an urban county, and right next to us is this county with tiny little villages, Columbia County. They just finished collecting signatures to have on the ballot in May the right to a sustainable energy future ordinance that will ban coal and oil trains through the county and will ban fossil fuel export terminals in Clatskanie, where they're supposed to be built. In Coos County on the coast, again, they think they'll be on the ballot this coming May. Will be a ban on it'll be a sustainable energy future ordinance again that bans the LNG pipeline and the LNG export terminal in Coos Bay in the bay. I've helped to start a group in Ashland, Oregon, which is Jackson County.
You're all over the place.
I'm all over the place. They're hoping to kind of jump on the bandwagon with the pipeline. The LNG pipeline will also go through their county. So yeah, the main thing that I do is I help communities get sparked in this political strategy direction, in a community rights strategy direction, and help them to realize that they can actually write a law themselves to protect their health and welfare, and not plead with state or federal government people.
Doesn't the government then challenge the legitimacy of that local law?
Well, we had assumed years ago that way more of the ordinances would be challenged than have been. But only 5% of 200 communities have been legally challenged to date.
That's hard to believe.
I know it is.
Some success.
Yeah. The laws
somehow it's going to move up the line and get the Supreme Court involved.
Well, the Supreme Court gets involved much later in the process. It doesn't go straight from the county to the Supreme Court, but the methodology that we use, the local, the municipal and county ballot initiatives that we run in all these communities, that is actually just the first phase of a larger goal, because it's clearly not sustainable as a social movement for us to keep passing laws that are illegal. Sooner or later, I mean, that's not how you build, a successful movement. You have to make the laws legal.
Yes.
At the local level. And the way that you do that is you start challenging state laws and state constitutional structures. So in 9 states, we actually have enough local laws passed that we've built a state community rights network. That's a network of the local governments that have passed these laws. And those groups are now attacking illegitimate corporate rights in the state laws and stripping corporate constitutional rights out. So for the Colorado is probably the furthest along. In Colorado, they're currently collecting 100,000 signatures to put on the ballot next year something that would amend their state constitution through the ballot box, and if it passes, it would strip corporations of their, in the state constitution would be rewritten so that it would be illegal for corporations to sue local governments that are simply trying to protect their own health and welfare by banning corporate activities.
That's rather ambitious.
It is ambitious. But the work that we do is about challenging the structures of law that make real democracy impossible. We're not single-issue activist campaign.
Okay.
We're challenging the structures of law that violate our rights in this democratic republic. And those 3 structures of law that I mentioned earlier make it illegal for us to protect our own health and welfare locally. So the ultimate goal is to get rid of those structures of law so that our local laws become legal.
How is local government in the Portland metro area reacting to your activities?
Well, we haven't put forward our ordinance yet, and so there hasn't been a reaction because we're not circulating the proposed ordinance yet. But I'm happy to be really honest and say I'm not very happy with our local city government. At all. I mean, I think our mayor has done an abysmal job, and I was absolutely delighted when he decided he wasn't going to run again, because watching this guy for another term was going to make me very depressed. All of the developer interests that are keeping him funded really depressed me, and I just haven't liked the way he has swayed without any kind of rudder, it seems like, on what he believes. And I've been really disappointed in I got really involved in paying attention to how the city council operates around the burying of our open water reservoirs because I live really close to Mount Tabor, and there's these 3 absolutely gorgeous reservoirs in the park that are our drinking water supply.
To the Portland metro area?
Yeah, and our city council has been, I mean, almost to the point of claiming that they're corrupt. I don't understand why they're so asleep at the wheel. They're refusing to defend the city's open water reservoirs, and they're claiming that they've been forced by the EPA to spend almost $1 billion to take our reservoirs offline. Washington Park Reservoir is being destroyed as we speak and replaced with a gazillion-dollar park and a buried water tank. And the Mount Tabor reservoirs are all being taken offline right now and replaced with underground water tanks, which are a much less safe way to store drinking water. And all 5 members of our city council have been atrocious on this issue. I've just watched them not do their job.
Why is that?
I don't know. I have no idea.
Money?
They
power?
act like there's nothing they can do.
There must be some sort of an influence to have them behaving this way that's not in the public interest.
There must be, but you know, I mean, I used to have enormous respect for Amanda Fritz, and she's just been towing the same line. I'm sorry, there's nothing I can do, since she was the one I respected the most. So I'm ready to throw them all out, but I'm not. It's not the work I do, so I just watch with dismay.
Yeah, does it go all the way up to Salem, where we lost Kitts Harbor because of some shenanigans?
I have no idea.
You stay on the local level pretty much.
But I think I get my gut instinct is that Kate Brown is probably a more honest governor
recent
than
governor.
Kitts Harbor,
Right.
but you know, I'm fairly new in the state. I'm not that well versed in state politics yet. Yeah.
Well, we've got a couple of minutes left to talk about whatever else you want to talk about for a few minutes before we close.
Well, I always love, whenever I'm interviewed, I always love to tell people what it says in every state constitution in the United States about our rights, because people have forgotten this stuff.
Please.
I'll read you a couple of state constitutions. I'll start with Oregon. Article 1, Bill of Rights. Section 1, Natural Rights Inherent in People. We declare that all power is inherent in the people, and all free governments are founded on their authority and instituted for their peace, safety, and happiness, and they have at all times a right to alter, reform, or abolish the government in such manner as they may think proper. That's the first paragraph of the highest law of the land in this state. Did you know that?
No.
That's pretty powerful language.
Yeah.
We, the people, have the right to alter, reform, or abolish the government when it's necessary to do so. We are the sovereign people.
But when the laws are applied and the governing is applied, don't they find a way to get around that and subvert it?
All the time.
So,
which is why our community rights work feels so important, because what we're doing is we're teaching Americans that they have authority over government, and that when the state government says you're not allowed to protect your own health and welfare under law, you're not allowed to ban a factory farm, you're not allowed to ban a clear cut, you're not allowed to say no GMO agriculture where you live. We remind people of the language of our state constitution that says we have authority over our government.
and then what do the people do?
People pass these laws which are so far illegal to push back on these illegitimate structures of law. That's the first step. And ultimately, we rewrite our state constitutions to protect our rights, and then we ultimately have to rewrite our federal constitution.
But
to protect
none of
our
those things
rights.
have happened so far.
Well, that's what I'm saying is we're up to one state constitution campaign. We have 9 state community rights networks, and we're a new movement. We're only 15 years old. And this is culture change work. So I think, if I'm sitting here with you 10 years from now, we probably will have already amended a few state constitutions, and we'll be starting to build a national network to start challenging the illegitimate parts of the federal constitution. Because the federal constitution privileges property over people. It's a property rights document. I don't know how long has it been since you've read the U.S. Constitution?
Forever.
It's a property rights document.
So then you'll be challenging the power and the control of the entire system in the government
Yes.
implied in the corporations.
Yes. We're saying corporations do not have legitimate authority. They're a business structure, Don. A corporation is an it. Have you ever thought about the fact that you can't photograph a corporation?
No. And they're going to be yelling at me in a few minutes if we don't sign off, okay? So in the last minute or so we have, will you tell the viewers anything you want to say to them in the last minute or so? That would be good for them to hear right now, based on what we talked about tonight or anything else that's on your mind.
I would love for
and this
viewers,
camera, look at that one.
I would love for viewers to find out more about the community rights movement. My website, paulcienfuegos.com. You can see my weekly podcast and radio commentary, which you can sign up for. You can go to my homepage also and sign up for my community rights update, which comes out every 2 to 3 weeks with news and views about the developments in our community rights movement nationally. 1,200 subscribers and climbing. So get involved in the community rights movement. Contact me. I'll tell you what's going on where you live.
Thank you so much for coming on.
You're very welcome.
Well, I enjoyed you so much. So a few public service announcements, Mr. E, before we sign off. To watch my shows on the web, Google Don Baham YouTube. There's hundreds of shows on there, and guests as nearly as interesting as Paul Cienfuegos was. And what else do we have to show the viewers here? We got to tell you about the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU. Without the ACLU, our civil liberties would be down the tubes more than they are. So contact the ACLU and see how you can join. Oh, I got to remind you to remember KFC, not Kentucky Fried Chicken, Dr. Don's KFC. Kind, friendly, and charitable. Be kind, be friendly, and be charitable. To you too. And you too. And you too, Mike, and you too, Paul, and you too, Control Room. Thanks again for watching, and see you next time.